Hi, I'm Ada Bobino, the founder and director of the San Antonio Black International Film Festival. And we are so excited to bring to you augmented reality. And so we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about a very special project that was created, an augmented reality comic book. So I want to bring in our guest for today, and we'll talk more about the whole process. Okay. Ram
Um,
Dividnini. Did I do
hmm
that right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. Because you told me, and then my brain just.
No problem.
So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I just thought it was so interesting. The whole festival is on animation, and Eric Battle, who worked on your project as the editor, passed your information on to me. And as I went into it, I was like, this is so cool, you know? And so I
hmm
really wanted to just start with can can you really break down for the audience what is AR or augmented reality? Like what exactly is that?
Sure. Well, augmented reality is literally an invisible layer that exists and it's accessible through your phone. Invisible in the sense it's not, you can't see it physically, but only available in the kind of a digital sphere. But through your phone, it adds this invisible layer on top of artwork, books, other stuff, materials, and it provides a interface for people to see other materials, other content, other stories. Probably most people have been introduced to augmented reality through Facebook, and if you go on like Instagram's Facebook, you can put like weird
Mm.
faces, images on your faces, and things like that. Well, that's augmented reality. I've taken augmented reality and figured out how to make it into a storytelling device, which
Hmm.
is what's kind of unique about what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, you have a background. You're a filmmaker, publisher, um, a founder, or you got a rat is Ratapalik.
That's correct.
All right, I'm proud of myself. Two for two. So you're based out of New York City and New Delhi. So
That's correct.
how did you even get started into this realm of augmented reality? Like, how was that introduced to you? How did you get understand it?
Sure. Well, I did. So let me just say the comic book that's part of this festival is called Jupiter Invincible, and it's a augmented reality comic book about a African American enslaved man who suddenly gets the power of invincibility. And one of the unique things that we did with AR is through my research, I learned about slavery in America, and many of the stories and images were then integrated into the comic book so that people can learn more about the history of America and slavery in America, and especially the African American experience. Now, I got started in comics and augmented reality with my first comic called Priya Shakti, which is India's first female superhero, and she's also a rape survivor. So back in 2004, I'm sorry, 2000 and yeah, 2012
Hmm.
is when I first started doing this. And I was developing the comic book about Priya, and I was literally one day, let me just say, frame this one thing.
Hmm.
Augmented reality back in 2012 didn't really exist. It was out there, but Facebook didn't have it, Microsoft didn't have it, Google didn't have it. No one, Apple didn't have it into integrated in their phones,
Hmm.
and it was relatively unknown for most people. And when I was kind of researching the comic, I wanted to add this idea of providing something more in depth than just what the comic story told, but to include voices of survivors, include all these other back end stories that helped me develop this comic book, and I wanted to somehow bring it forward into the comic. So I was literally one day in the Vatican at the Sistine Chapel, and there I was, marveling at the fresco, at the artwork, the fresco, and everything. I literally held my phone up to get a close up zoom of one of the images. Obviously, I was told not to do that. Eventually didn't do it. But what I realized is if I can zoom into one of the images, maybe through my phone, I can add this layer, this informational layer on top of the artwork that was on the ceiling. And then I went home and started researching what it was, and that's where I discovered augmented reality. So literally, the Sistine Chapel was my inspiration for
Oh,
the
wow.
creation of augmented reality. And as I said earlier, this was radically and very different. Not many people were using it. Um, there was a game that came out a little bit later called Pokemon Go, which many
Mm,
know, but that
mhm.
was 2 years in. Hasn't been wasn't even released yet. So that was another 2 years later, before my comic book came out with AR. So I was one of the first comics with augmented reality, and we launched Priya Shakti, and it became a big hit, and a lot of readers and a lot of press coverage, not only for addressing social issues, but for the innovative use of technology. I mean, just imagine a comic book about someone who's been raped
Right.
using this innovative technology to go in more in depth into the stories of the characters.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I have to really just bring that to people's attention. I mean, you are a creator of an interactive social activist comic book. I
Right.
mean, when people think comic book and animation, you think cartoons, you think, but you took the seriousness and brought it to a medium where people could learn in a different way.
That's correct.
That is awesome.
Well,
That is
thank
really
you.
awesome.
I mean, that's why I think the comic book resonated with so many people, and especially with survivors of gender-based violence,
Right.
because um, even though the story was fictional, it was based on reality, and it was based on interviews that I did with gang rape survivors in India,
Mm,
and those
mhm.
voices, you could hear them from the women themselves, through the augmented reality.
Wow.
You can read the comic book and then go back to the beginning and then scan the pages, and you would literally get this enormous amount of content in an invisible layer that became visible to you, and including those voices that helped develop the story.
That is awesome. I
Thank
want
you.
to just kind of give people a sense of what is entailed. So I'm gonna play. We're gonna go back to Jupiter because I do want to talk more about Jupiter for the festival and expose that to folks that are in our audience. But I'm gonna take us out and then I'm gonna bring the clip in because we can't talk over the clip, and then
Sure.
we'll talk about it. So that gives folks a sample of what is entailed. And Jupiter Invincible, I like the way you say an enslaved person. Because
Hmm.
usually when people talk about Africans who were enslaved, they always call them slaves.
Sure.
And that's not who they are. That's what they
That's
were
right.
made to be. But I mean, that's the way we need to start looking at that. But Jupiter Invincible is an augmented reality comic book series, and it's about an African American enslaved person, Jupiter, who is suddenly given the power of immortality. And the story takes place in a southern plantation near Baltimore before the U.S. Civil War. So, okay, how did this even come about? Hey, let's do a comic book on, an enslaved person. I mean, how did that even come about for you?
Sure. Well, there was actually, I think there was two critical things that came into being. One, I was in Durban in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I grew up in the U.S. right around the time when apartheid was ending. So my experience of apartheid was what I saw on television was very limited. And when I went to South Africa and started talking with many of the freedom fighters in
Mm,
Durban and in Johannesburg, they were telling me their stories. And I went to the Apartheid Museum and started really learning about it, and also exploring Gandhi, who was South African. Of course, he's Indian as well.
I
But
went to that museum.
oh, you
It
did?
was
Okay.
wow.
Very
Mhm.
powerful museum. And I
Yeah.
saw a lot of the colonial, quote unquote, colonial photos of South Africa.
Mhm.
Um, and what was kind of clear is many of these photos looked very similar to what you would see in the South in during Jim Crow time.
Mhm.
And that really awakened me that this was a really the slavery and the issues of slavery and apartheid, there was a lot of correlations, and it's something that really needed to be explored and
Mhm.
told. So when I came back, I met up with my good friend Yusuf Kumiaka, who is an African American poet. I mean, he's one of the great American poets of the 20th century. I mean, he's still alive. One of the great American poets, Pulitzer Prize winning poet, who really dwells deep into the African American experience, into his own experience growing up in Louisiana, and going through the civil rights movement, Vietnam, and up into the modern times. And he loved this idea of telling a new story through comics, um, uh, uh, about a character like Jupiter. I mean, this was a process in which we discussed and developed and back and forth. There was many ideas and many sessions, and like I said, it took about 2 years to come to fruition. So we spent almost a year
Mhm.
writing the story and building the character and the characters and the world that he occupies. And this involved on my side enormous amount of research, going to the Library of Congress, going to Schoenberg Center here in New York City, to going to the some of the plantations in Maryland, learning about many of the enslaved people who existed at that time in Maryland,
Mhm.
and kind of building this whole world out. And while I was doing that, I was of course filming and documenting and photographing stuff for the augmented reality layer, because I knew in the back of my mind, because of my success with Priya Shakti, that I wanted to add augmented reality to the Jupiter Invincible comic book,
Mhm.
and especially use it as a tool to learn about American history and African American history and just history in general.
Mhm. No, I mean, I was going to ask you how you connected with Yusuf, but you know him, so
Yeah,
you were easily able to
yeah,
bring him in. But yeah, I experienced that museum in South Africa, and it was heavy. And
without a doubt.
you know what the bizarre thing is? It's right by an amusement park. You
Was it?
remember?
Yeah, I mean, it's that whole complex. There's a lot of things happening, just tons of things around there. Yeah.
Yeah, that blew me away. But yeah, it was a good experience to see that. So I really want you to kind of delve into it in terms of your team, how you brought everyone together to work with you,
Hmm.
even approaching what was the Ford Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts for funding,
Right.
even approaching them with this project where people like, huh? Did they was there an understanding, or you had something to show? But
Sure.
how did that process go for you, even trying to make this happen?
Well, I mean, the 2 year process also involved raising money through grants. Ford Foundation wasn't involved in this one. They're involved in the first Priya Shakti,
Okay.
but National Endowment for the Arts, New York State Council for the Arts, and various other funding sources sort of came together
Hmm.
to make us allow us to do the first comic book. I mean, we also wanted to make this comic book accessible and available for free, the digital copies for free. So we weren't thinking of a commercial model for this comic. We were really thinking about the educational aspect of it, and to an extent, this empowerment. You have to also remember a few years earlier, Black Panther came out. It was a huge hit globally. So that was also in the back of my mind, not so much in Yusuf's mind, but definitely in
Hmm.
my mind, that I
Hmm.
wanted to really tap into this empowerment, understanding, and understanding about history. Um, I mean, I mean, I think the important thing is that even though Jupiter is an enslaved person, he is someone who is very much his own person and character. He has his own inner strength, and through this through the life that he lives, he goes through this metaphysical, supernatural situation where he's given the power invincibility, which is a very critical part of this. I was following and Yusuf as well, a lot of the motifs that you would see in superhero comics,
Hmm.
but very much grounded in history.
So you made him into a horse breaker and a coach driver born into slavery.
Hmm.
Where did this development of Jupiter, even the name, where did all of that come from? Were y'all just did you just brainstorm on that and just
Yeah,
create a story?
no, no. I mean, Yusuf and I brainstormed, but eventually Yusuf being the writer and really the real literary talent behind this project, he's the one who made the decisions on all the names. I mean, I I I was there as an editor and someone who kind of helped Yusuf understand comics and the structure of comics because this was his first comic book that he did. But Yusuf, of course, not only being a poet, he has written many stage plays, has written many operas and things like that. So he knows conflict and narration and narratives and multiple people scenarios for stage. So there was a bit of a transition into comics because comics are very much a image driven medium.
Mhm.
So that was something that Yusuf had to sort of work with, and we were able to perfectly balance, I think, his literary and poetic talents and his use of words with the incredible images.
Mhm. And then the look of Jupiter. How did you all come up with how you wanted him to look?
Sure. Well, first Yusuf and I sat down and went through that enormous
And
archive
I'm
of
sorry,
research.
and introduce. I'm sorry, in the mix of saying, can you introduce who the artist was, the illustrator? Okay, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
I'm plan to. So Yusuf and I, before we approached an illustrator, we we took the huge archive of materials and looked through the web and history and things like that, and basically created a lookbook of who these characters we want them to look like, are inspired by, and so forth. And with this wealth of materials, we approached uh, a few illustrators, but one we really wanted to go be involved was Ashley A. Woods. She's a remarkable African American illustrator, but a phenomenal illustrator who illustrates many superhero comics from Wonder Woman to many others. And she had some free time or available time, and she signed on board and became the illustrator of the comic. And all the artwork that you see in the comic book is hers.
Hmm. Yeah, and you have editor Eric Battle. So
Hmm.
how did Eric get involved? Who's going to also be joining us with Sabiff? But how did he get involved with the project as an editor? And what would that entail
Sure.
as an editor
Well,
of augmented reality
yeah.
series?
Well, I mean, Eric was involved in the augmented reality, and to an extent, Ashley was minimally involved. She had, of course, had to make the artwork available and multi-layered so that I can play around with it in AR. But Eric was very much crucial to the project because he also understood the structure of storytelling and images and how one panel, these are called sequential art. So how one panel interacts with the next panel and so forth, and where the text should be and where things should be, where the eye moves on the page in a comic book. It's a beautiful art and an understanding of how people read comics, and Eric has, I mean, decades of experience in doing this. And Ashley and I really wanted someone, because this was a new comic, a new story. We wanted someone like Eric to really put his input into it, and he was very valuable for that.
Hmm. So, what does it take? We know what it takes for a movie. We're both filmmakers. The amount of
Right.
people involved, the credits that you read.
Mhm.
What does it take in terms of the amount of people involved to put together an augmented reality shoot?
Sure. Well, I mean, we of course know about the writers and the illustrators, but no, I think that's pretty obvious. But for AR, I pretty much did most of it myself. But
Hmm.
but in this involved, of course, I've been doing it for almost like 7, 8 years by then. So I had to basically get all the images and artwork and things like that, and then I went out and shot a lot of videos and a lot of footage, which I would then integrate into the AR, and then eventually I shot people and actors in front of green screen, and then removed the green screen and integrated them into the comic, so that when you saw the comic open the page, you would literally see an actor moving physically across the page,
Hmm.
which is kind of cool. So there's multiple things that I did. I couldn't say all the AR is the same. Like, so that's why if you change from page to page, you might see animation, you might see some special effects, you might see actors, you might see a ton of information, photos from the Library of Congress and other places explaining the situation of African Americans during that time, um, uh, explaining what slavery was, explaining the cruelty of slavery, and so on.
So I still don't have my brain wrapped around how you do it.
Well,
I mean the process. I mean, you
right.
mentioned green screen and you cut like
Yeah,
the
it's
women that were on that picture, they were cut in to that picture.
yeah. So that's another thing I was playing around with was deep tech. So that was a photo that I was able then to bring the characters to life through deep tech. So there,
That's a
like I said,
program. That's a program, DTEP.
yeah. So
Okay.
there's like many things that I use from, of course, Illustrator to Photoshop to
Mm.
Premiere to After Effects to green screen filming to deep tech to all of this, and all these elements are kind of brought together when I designed the page. So I work from page to page, and when I design the page, I then bring all these different elements together to create something of an experience on that page. So when people scan it using their phones, they'll be then able to see all those things come to life.
Hmm. That is so. I mean, it's just so interesting.
Thank you.
I mean, do you get excited as you're doing that? Like, oh my God, let me do this.
Yeah.
Let me go back. I mean, it's like,
Oh, I mean, there's
oh,
many
I can do
times.
this. I can do that.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm always very cognizant of what I want to present during that page. I mean, there are some pages that are really difficult pages dealing with slavery that Ashley illustrated, and of course Youssef wrote. So those pages, I wanted people to not only see the artwork and what was being told on the page. When I did the AR, I wanted to get the history behind why these things were occurring.
Mhm.
So there was that element to think about. But when something got completed and it was really good, I would then take like a screenshot with my phone, literally film it, and send it to Youssef and Ashley and get their response. And they were like just astounded and blown away by it because it was pretty impressive.
So you all worked all virtually then with
That's
each other
right.
the whole time.
Well, well, I mean, Yusuf and I worked for a year physically, and then COVID came, and at that point, it was another year in which we worked virtually. And Ashley, I didn't meet until the very end when we launched at Tribeca in
Wow.
July. I think it was June 2021. So yeah, we're physically with Yusuf for a year, virtually with everyone else after that.
So what is your background? Your background in animation, engineering, IT? I mean, teaching
Well,
history. I mean, what is your
I mean, it's just like AR. It's a bit of both. So I actually did study history and political science, American history, and then I did do some IT work when back in the .com days, and then I became a documentary filmmaker. So that allowed me to bring my history and the technology together, and the filmmaking and documentary filmmaking all together to then develop this AR interface.
So you didn't just become a documentary filmmaker. You are an award-winning documentary filmmaker.
Thank
You
you.
produced the feature documentary "The Karma Killings," which was shot in India and released on Netflix. And then there's you produced the Russian Woodpecker, which won the Grand Jury Prize at the 215 Sundance Film Festival. So what's
That's right.
next on the horizon for Ram in terms
Well,
of bucket list items you're trying to do?
well, we are working on the next chapter of Jupiter Invincible, which will be coming out in December of this year, 2022,
Mhm.
where we're going to have a physical event and at the Bowery Poetry Club in New York City. the theater space. We're working with the Stella Adler Acting Studio and many African American actors to basically produce and show a radio play of the comic. So basically, what you would have is projected up on the screen the comic book pages, and sitting below the screen will be the actors performing the text and the audio from the pages. And you would hear, and then the comic book would come to life through the actors' voices. And then you'd go to the next panel, and it's sort of the whole story is then told. Almost, it's what they call a radio play, but this is a comic book radio play, so we've taken it to another level.
I was going to say, you are some next level thinking here, visionary.
Thank
That is
you.
that is awesome. What advice do you have to, youth or even young folks or even folks who are interested in this period how would they get into learning and really becoming involved with creating for AR?
Well, I mean, the AR technology has really developed immensely since I first started. So a lot of basic HTML5 interfaces and a lot of apps out there that are streamline the process. I mean, the mere fact that Instagram and Snapchat and all these things have AR integrated into their apps makes it very accessible and easy for most people. So, I mean, even TikTok is pretty uses it very robustly. So, I think the first thing I would say, even before getting into the AR field, is figure out the story and the characters and research, and really develop that first. Because, as I said, I spent a year
Mhm.
researching and developing it with Youssef, and before we even got to a point where we could talk to an illustrator or think about AR. So that to me is very important.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that's a really important takeaway from just even talking to you is that there's power in your voice and your
Hmm.
stories, and even starting in a whole nother realm, of animation of AR or VR.
Hmm.
um, you can do something impactful and
Yes.
powerful, and so it doesn't have to be, you know frivolous and mindless. So
Yes.
I just applaud you on that, and I really appreciate what you're doing and what you continue to do. Is there any bucket list thing on your list that you want to get to or
Mhm.
do in terms of the next documentary or AR project?
Oh man, that's a good question. I mean, I'm kind of exploring podcasting now, so I've been working with a couple ideas with that and storytelling through audio. So it's
Hmm.
a new medium for me. I do want to eventually get back to making a documentary. There's some ideas in India that I want to go back and explore, and this would be the first time I'm going back to India since COVID. I
Hmm.
literally was in India right before COVID hit, and came back and haven't been back since for, I mean, for obvious reasons. But now it's a time for me to go back and explore my heritage and find the stories again and hopefully make another documentary there.
You still have a lot of people there that you visit?
Yeah, yeah,
That
of
you've been
course, a
doing
lot of family
family?
and a lot of friends too.
Mhm. Nice. So where can people see? I'm going to put it up again. Where can
Hmm.
people see Jupiter and support you on that? And how is it that you're offering it for free? Because even
Well,
comic
because
books cost.
yeah, well, that's because we got the grants. So
That's awesome.
yeah, powerofjupiter.com is where you can download it for free. It's a PDF, and of course
Oh,
all the
.org.
formats.
.org.
Yeah, it's .org. Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
And it's also many different iterations, iBooks, you name it, Google Books, easy to find and easy to download. Yeah.
Hmm. So that I'm leaving that up on the screen, but I also want folks to know that they can go to your website and see your other works and what you're doing as well at
Right.
bravekids.me.
Yep.
And just want to leave that up for a minute. Well, I'm like in awe of the things that you're doing. I think it's awesome, and that I think more people need to think seriously about, like I said, I'm big on impact. How
Right.
they can offer an impact or be a change agent in their own medium. And animation is one of them. Augmented reality is another. So, Ram, I want to thank you so much for giving us this time, and we would like to show an MP4 of a version at the at the festival as well. So
Great. Thank you for having me.
that. All right. Well, you have a good rest of your day. We'll be looking more forward to seeing more Jupiter on the horizon. Take
Thanks and
care.
all the best.
Okay. Thank
Take care.
you. Bye bye.